we're going to be hearing shortly from Murray Horton. There's a free trade deal being negotiated in secret at the moment, and Murray is the spokesperson for CAFCA, Campaign Against Foreign Control of Aotearoa. Without further ado, Murray.
Right, sure, fine.
Thank you.
Right. This PowerPoint was set up by my organiser in Whangarei, so it's sort of not something that I've done. I know nothing about PowerPoints, but I mean, if somebody can sort of push the button when I say so, and we get going, it's sort of all it is high points of the speech. There's no graphics, I'm afraid. There's no pretty pictures. There's some material here. Everything on this table is free except for this, my last issue of our December issue of Foreign Control Watchdog cost $5. So, but if you haven't got $5, take it away anyway. I want to take it back on the plane to Christchurch tomorrow. This is the last of a fairly intense 2.5 weeks going around the North Island. So, I've never spoken in the Hutt Valley before. Actually, I was pointing out when I arrived here that I actually spent part of my childhood in the Hutt. Got found out the relatives out here, so I actually went to school in Waiwatu, as it was known then, and used to live in Woburn, and the first one who I met married was on the opening of the Waiwatu Marae in the 1950s, these exotic people who cooked food in the ground, and then provided very large boys who ran over the top of me when I played rugby against them in Waiwatu Primary School, etc. So that was the Hutt of the 1950s, and then I went to Christchurch, you see, so that was it. Okay, so before we begin, one point I should make. Length of speech. Now, last night Bill Rosenberg was the chair and he said, how long are you speaking for? And I said it was timed at 80 minutes in Palmerston North, which is the length of a game of rugby, without half time. And he said, oh no, an hour. An hour's too much. They won't be able to handle more than an hour in Wellington. So I'll leave it in your hands. I spoke for an hour last night and that covered the problem. And with no time for any solution. So of course the first bloody question from them was, what are we going to do about it? So you can have the full thing, which is literally about an hour and 20 minutes, or you can have an hour, which will cover what's wrong, but we'll talk about nothing about what to do about it. Any indications? The full multi? All right. When I was on Havelock North last week, they said, keep it to an hour, and I said, I'll speak faster than usual. And so I did that and got through it in an hour, and then they said, that was very interesting, but we couldn't understand a word of it afterwards. So that's the third alternative. Okay, right, we'll go for the full work, so I have warned you. Right. Before I begin, you've heard all these jokes, Kane. I get time because somebody has to, and I got a free watch when I resubscribed. Francie heard this the other night at Pycock. But I was reading this Time magazine at the start of this trip going up to Auckland. It's entitled Yes, America's in Decline, No, America is Still Number One. It's their March the 14th issue. But the reason I'm quoting this is that it's relevant to what we get told by senior government ministers of the likes of Bill English that namely the country is stuffed. We're on the way down, therefore everything has to be sold, privatised, hocked off because we've gone broke. Services have to be cut, etc. So in this Time magazine, which is about the decline or otherwise of the US, they have a thing called a prosperity index, which is by an outfit I've never heard of, called the Legatum Institute, but it must mean something to Time magazine. The Legatum Institute's Index of Prosperity, a measure of material wealth and quality of life among 110 nations as of now. So therefore the question I have for you before we start tonight is, who do you think is the 5th most prosperous country in the world now, and who do you think is the 10th out of the top 10? I'll give you a clue. Britain, France, Germany, India and China don't appear in the top 10 countries in the world. So who do you think is the 5th most prosperous country on earth now, and who do you think is the 10th?
Australia?
Australia's 4th. So 5th and 10th.
Cuba.
No mention of Cuba. There's no third world countries there, or second world countries either actually.
Germany.
Germany, not listed among the top 10 countries in the world. No Germany, Britain, France, India or China. No Russia. Netherlands is 9. What did you say? Sorry? That's correct. According to this, New Zealand is the 5th most prosperous country on earth right now. And who do you think is 10th? The USA. That's right. New Zealand 5, America 10.
Climate must be true.
That's right. It's the received word of God, and they give away watches. So there you go. That's my commercial break. So Norway 1, Denmark 2, Finland 3, Australia 4, the country that's miles ahead of us, New Zealand 5, Sweden 6, Canada 7, Switzerland 8, Netherlands 9, US 10th. The point being of this graph that the US had dropped from first place tie in 2007. It's dropped 10 places in 4 years.
What's the definition of prosperity?
A measure of material wealth and quality of life. among 110 nations. They have a list of surveys across the top there saying why falling behind, where America trails behind. There's no other mention of New Zealand in the article. For example, domestic savings rate, number 3 is Kazakhstan, number 84 is the US. And so it goes. So, I mean, it's... and optimism about job availability, number 3 the Philippines, number 86 the US. So, yes, the point I'm making about this is next time you see Bill English on TV saying it's all buggered and therefore it's all going to be flogged off, or we've got to cut this service, we've got to do this, we've got to do that, bear in mind, we are apparently, according to this, the 5th most prosperous country on earth now.
What was the edition of that? Just for edition?
March the 14th, 2011. Right, yes. And I don't imagine the graphics will show up on the online edition if you immediately go to www.time.com. They tend to run the text but not the graphics or the illustrations. Okay, let's get going. Right. New Zealand's not for sale. Yeah, you can push somebody push the first key to see what comes up. Well, there we go. This is actually a 2008 graphic that was done by our graphic artists in Christchurch. We slightly tweaked it to make it relevant to one more election year. This is actually done for the 2008 election campaign. It's still entirely relevant. Right, New Zealand's not for sale. I'm the spokesperson for the Campaign Against Foreign Control of Aotearoa, or CAFCA. My actual job title is the Secretary Organiser. CAFCA is a Christchurch-based organisation dating back to the mid-1970s, closer to 40 now, whose aim, summing it up in one sentence, is to expose and oppose all aspects of foreign control of this country. Now, if you want to learn more about the issue and what we say and do about it, then have a look at material, or online, up here, these top 2 websites, CAFCA and Watchdog, which is the online edition of that there. This one here is a mere snip at 112 pages. The December issue. Comes with very nice obituaries too, so if you join up and die, you get a very nice obituary. Bear that in mind. Hopefully some of you will join CAFCA, which is the best way to stay informed about the issue. Now, this is the first such speaking tour that I've undertaken since 2002, which was also, not coincidentally, an election year, and I'm determined not to repeat the error of trying to pack in the facts and figures which tend to overwhelm the shell-shocked audience who invariably describe it as depressing, and which means that my speech goes on for far too long, even longer than what it will go on. I'm mindful of the fact that all of us would like to go to bed on the same date on which this meeting starts. So I'm going to concentrate on analysis and presenting an overview with a few salient facts tossed in, and I recommend that you use our abundant resources to get the extremely detailed picture. This thing, for example, the newsletter contains a record of an analysis of every single decision made by the Overseas Investment Office, and we have a database of those going back 20 years now, so which you can cross-reference. So the media comes to us for sort of information, for detail on those sort of things. Now, there's only one point that I need to make about CAFCA for the benefit of people who've never heard of us. Immigration is not our issue. We have no argument with the people of any country, including the one that I'll be speaking about tonight, only their governments and the transnational corporations that are notionally from those particular countries. Now, I say notionally because transnational corporations, or TNCs, are simultaneously stateless and a state unto themselves. Ultimately, everybody in this country is a migrant. It's just a question of how long ago our ancestors migrated here, and we're all Pacific Islanders. In my case, a blue-eyed one with an Australian grandfather, descended from a convict actually. My dear old dad said, oh, so there's 2 criminals in the family. And married to an Asian with a very big family in the Philippines. Neither I nor CAFCA has any argument with foreigners. I've had plenty of experience of being a foreigner in other people's countries. I was a Kiwi dog bludger in Sydney when that was the moral panic in the Australian news media in the 1970s, when Kiwis were the white coconuts of the South Pacific. And we were the ones all taking their jobs, and we were the cause of all the problems in Australia and get out and all that sort of stuff. And so yeah, I've been there, done that, and got paid the dole for it. And I know that people are the same the world over, with differences only being skin deep. I would be equally happy to regard either Australia or the Philippines as home if the circumstances ever arose that I had to leave Aotearoa. At this point, I need to briefly divert and acknowledge that I live in Christchurch, which has been a very interesting place to be in recent months, to put it mildly. As recently as Saturday night, when my wife rang me up here to say she was in the dark and cold with no power, and where the hell was that switch I told her was on the main that turned the power off. Came back on 2 hours later. But so far, several thousand earthquakes have not persuaded us to move from our home or city, not even the vicious bastard that slammed into the city like an atom bomb on February the 22nd. I was working alone in my home office at the time, and it was quite an experience, both then and for some times afterwards. I could devote this entire speech to that subject, but that's not what we're here to talk about. Just briefly to say that we've been damaged in both earthquakes, both December and February, and while I've been on the road, the builders and Fletcher's boys have been looking at our house. So first time round we were assessed as having between $10,000 and $100,000 damage, which is called moderate, and I presume we've got a bit more now since the February one. The only earthquake story with which I'll regale you is one which could have meant that the speaking tour would never have taken place. All I need to say is that I was in the CTV building in an upstairs room being interviewed about the subject of this very speech a couple of hours before it was pancaked in the quake, killing up to 100 people, including the 25-year-old reporter who was interviewing me at 10:15 that morning. I was one of the last people to see him alive, as it turned out. We sat around in the boardroom afterwards and talked about what he'd done at university, what his thesis was on, and his postgraduate journalism, and the fact that he'd started at CTV the week before. I would like to dedicate this speech to the memory of all those killed in that dreadful tragedy in my beloved Christchurch, which was, and hopefully will be again, the most beautiful of cities. It's a bit rough and smelly at the moment, but we'll get there. An awful lot of soldiers in the streets too, so if you want to know what the army does, we'll go to Christchurch, because there they go. I read something in the Don the other day about light armoured vehicles being secretly shipped over to Afghanistan. Well, they must be getting them from Christchurch, because a lot of them on the street down there at the moment, blocking central city intersections. Another strange sight when you go downtown. Right, let's get on with it. This year's election is one of the most important in decades. Both major parties are committed to policies. We can change that, push that on now, please. Both major parties are committed to, okay, push one more actually. We've done the migrants. Yep, there we are. Both major parties are committed to policies by which the New Zealand economy is even more dominated by transnational corporations. More and more of our farmland is owned by foreigners, publicly owned assets are privatised, and the country is locked ever more tightly into disadvantageous free trade and foreign investment agreements, of which the biggest one being negotiated in secret, as Grant said, is the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. This is the means to effect a free trade agreement with the US. Now, there are some differences between National and Labour on these issues, but they're only ones of degree, not of principle. A change in government will not, in itself, be enough to change the disastrous course on which this country is set, one of domination by global big business in the US. This country needs people power to let the world know that New Zealand is not for sale. So tonight, I'll speak on these 5 subheadings. The Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement and the dangers it poses to the New Zealand economy and to our very democracy. Privatisation of our public assets. The relentless takeover of New Zealand businesses and land by transnational corporations, the reabsorption of New Zealand into the US empire, and most importantly, the one that didn't get talked about in Wellington last night, how the New Zealand people can fight back. It's too important to be left up to the politicians. So let's start with the TPPA. We'll maybe move on one here. Let's see. Yep, okay.